The market doesn't know what keeps you up at night. It doesn't know when you want to retire, and it doesn't know how old you are. The simple truth is, the market doesn't care. But if you care, you've tuned into the right place. You're listening to Investor Resources, bringing clarity to the confusing world of finance. Here are your hosts of Investor Resources, Don Creech and Perry Sykes.
I'm Don Creech.
And I'm Perry Sykes, and welcome to the Investor Resources Podcast.
So there has been discussion on the web about the problems created by the United States' massive demand for borrowing more money.
Correct. And boy, we do have that.
And we'd agree it's a problem. Sooner or later, this needs to be resolved. We need some sense of fiscal responsibility in Congress. The problem is that passing out money that you didn't have to create yourself buys votes. And that's a problem.
Yes.
People like handouts. But, that creates social problems because people who think they don't have to work for a living, don't have to do something to contribute to society, the welfare of the country, that's a downward slope. And it's really hard to stop that when it gains enough momentum. And we are facing a potential problem with that as we speak today. But the risk of losing our reserve currency, the dollar is the global reserve currency, it is not real high. It's certainly not at the present time. Because we can print money. Now, how are we going to pay our bills? Well, we're going to reach a point where sooner or later the inflation becomes a problem. And Treasury and the Federal Reserve can put the kibosh on Congress. They just haven't been willing to do so yet. And,
Correct.
And the public could raise up enough objection to cause some fiscal constraint. But we haven't been able to do that yet or been inclined to do so yet. Those who object to what's going on often are considered to be gold bugs. They're buying real metal gold, not gold securities. They warehouse food, survivalist stuff, because they believe we're going to collapse and we could be in another internal civil war. Those are all conspiracy theories. Maybe they'll come true, but right now we aren't recommending them.
It doesn't look like we're on the precipice of a total meltdown here. The US is not still, the best economy on the planet because of borrowing. We're actually we make more stuff, we have higher productivity, more GDP, and we're actually very efficient on a per capita basis. China is still, not as big an economy as the US is, and they have 1.4 billion people, and we've got 330 million. So the fact that we still have a larger economy speaks volumes about the strength of the U.S. economy and its position in the world, which is right now, the strongest economy on the planet. Coming out of, the great financial crisis back in 2008, we heard, time and time again, well, we're the cleanest dirty shirt on the dirty clothes pile, which we were. And now we're not doing well just based on the fact that no one else is. Back in 2008, the rest of the world was a complete mess, and so were we, but we fumbled through better than everyone else. Right now, we're actually productive, and we're actually making stuff. Our GDP is getting better, and just side by side, we're doing better than any other country right now. So we're actually very strong, and China makes the most noise about thinking they should be the reserve currency. They're trying to get other countries to do commerce, especially in energy right now, in their currencies. And the amount of that goes on is just a small fraction of a percent. There's not enough to make any difference. There really is no challenge right now for reserve currency, and there is no challenger for strongest economy in the United States. Sometimes it's just good to take a step back and take a look at that and realize, okay, we're doing better. This is not smoke and mirrors, and it's also not one step away from collapse, as sometimes you'll hear.
which is good for the stock market. But you skipped over two things that I'm just going to go back and touch on. And one is that the
Rats.
difference
Okay, go ahead.
the difference in the size of our populations.
Yeah,
We are generating about 40% more GDP in our country than China is, and they have 5 times more people than we do. What
that's impressive.
we have
Yeah,
freedom. We have freedom for people who want to get ahead, who want to improve themselves. They can do that. Opportunity is around. All they have to do is go knock on the door, come up with an idea. Freedom
yep,
has created allows for human initiative to be productive. The more productive I can be, the bigger the rewards I am likely to achieve to receive. And that makes all the difference in the world. There isn't a
it
country in
does.
the world that has the freedom we have. Try as we might to have our regulators take it away from us. So far, we are still the freest country around, and that
Yep,
shows up in economic results, in higher levels of income for the people who want to work. Um, we have more liquidity in our financial markets. We have better financial markets. We have better regulation to avoid the fraud and the mismanagement that you get when you start ending up in a socialist or an absolute dictator economy. America is a great place to grow up, to have the opportunity to work, and to make of yourself what you want to be. Dream big, and it's possible. It depends upon whether or not you want to put forth the effort. You can find a way, and it's not doesn't mean that you find your way the first time around. My goodness,
sure.
uh,
And it
you
doesn't
know,
mean it's easy, but it does mean here's where you do have the opportunity. This looking at data about just the size of the equity markets and the bond markets. The U.S. equity bond market combo is $71 trillion. The next largest is Japan at 10.7. China's all the way down to 4.2. They're just below, Canada and Germany. So they're not even in the ballpark as far as the size of the markets that we get to invest in. And that's the kind of broad strength that both gives you security, and that these markets are not going to just dry up and blow away. They're massive, and that there's opportunity there that you can take advantage of yourself. And that's which you just spoke to, Don. That's the big key. You have the freedom to go engage with those markets, and while they're not completely free either, they're the freest in the world, and that's why the size difference is so massive between the United States markets and every other country.
well, one of the other major strengths that we have so far, though it is weakening, and that is we have the best demographic structure in the world. As far as
Right.
our birth rate is slowing, but as far as the number of youth who are becoming working age or those who are already there and starting their careers on a ratio of the younger segments to the older segment, we're in better shape than anybody else. And part of the problem that China is facing is they have a terribly misstructured demographic situation. Their demographic data is just
Oh yeah,
absolutely upside down. They
it's
are
terrible.
like Japan, but magnified. And it's all because of the one child policy that they had. In Japan, it wasn't a forced one child policy. It was after World War II. It was so expensive to rebuild the country, the government just simply asked people to not have kids, but to spend their time and money rebuilding the country. And they did that voluntarily.
They did.
But, but
Correct.
now they have
Yep.
a problem as they've got too many older people, not enough young people to keep running the country. China would like to. China doesn't have to worry about attacking Japan. They will one day, at the current rate, be able just to go land on shore and take over because there won't be anybody there to defend the
Nobody
country.
home. Correct. Japan is not expanding into robotics as fast as they can for no reason. They know they're not going to have enough citizens for their economy to function. So they're going to need a lot of that robotic help just to do mundane tasks that an aging population can't do for itself. So they're looking to address that. It's just that it's a huge problem, and it's going to take a long time. Well, right now they can't get it turned around. Japan is another one of those countries that will pay you to get married. They will pay you to have kids. It's not helping. They've been they've been in that zero child policy, voluntary or not, for long enough that it's set in, and it's very, very difficult to reverse. And China, of course, is right there with them.
Well, you mentioned paying parents to have children,
Yeah,
and Russia has tried that, and it didn't work at
correct.
all.
No, no,
Russia's was a voluntary. They didn't impose a child limitation, but it was conditions were so bad that people didn't want to have kids, or they did have them and they died early because the living conditions were so
a
poor.
lot of that. Yep, yep.
And uh, it's been a couple of decades ago that they tried incentivizing childbirth with support, and people didn't buy it. They said the conditions are still not good enough, that I don't want the responsibility of raising children. So they have a
Right.
demographic problem, and if you go to war and you lose young men, it accentuates the demographic problem, because you need young
Correct.
men to stay home and court young women to have children. And
It's back.
that problem over there is just not very well thought out.
No, and they really weren't prepared for the total outcome, the total fallout from a demographic perspective, and it took decades to get in that situation. It'll take decades and decades to get out, and it's going to get worse in both those countries, all of those countries, before it gets better. So they have to deal with those problems. And like you said, Don, we don't have that issue right now. We still have a growing population, and so on the demographic front, we are looking pretty good. And only India is going to have some years where they're looking a little rosier than the U.S. is. They've got other challenges, but just from the demographic front, way ahead of most of the world. So it's one of those very positive things. Don't forget, we've got that built-in advantage. And another big one is energy. They talk about what's the energy future of your country, and the U.S., for all intents and purposes, is completely energy independent right now. If we're willing to use it, that's a political decision, but we're capable now of producing more oil, more fossil fuels than any country in history. So that's pretty strong position to be in case something does break out and we need to be more isolated. We're not going to have an energy problem in the United States, as long as we're willing to refine and use what's at our fingertips right now.
Well, we actually are the world's largest producer of fossil fuel energy, whether it's oil
Yeah.
or natural gas, LNG, gasoline, diesel, all the
Anything.
petrochemical
Yeah.
stuff that is generated. What most people are unaware of is our lifestyles dependent upon fossil fuels. And I think what we should do, I have a slide. In fact, we used it in our last Saturday's webinar. That is a slide that shows all of the products that we depend upon for our lifestyle. I think I'll have our producer slide it in at this point in time, just to give people an idea of how primitive our life would be without oil. But
It's
the
it's a lot of
Saudis,
stuff. Yeah.
because of the Saudis in the 70s, for boomers particularly, we think of them as having the hammer over our head, being able to cut off supply,
Sure.
raise the price of oil at their discretion to hammer us. And that is no longer the fact. Not only are we the world's largest producer, but we have the largest reserves. There is a new undeveloped reserve that has been found in Alaska in the last couple of years that is larger than all of the oil in Saudi Arabia. Think
Think
about
about
that.
that. So what? Yeah, we are not dependent upon OPEC for anything anymore, and that's a huge change, and people need to acknowledge that we really are energy independent. That's a really big deal on the global front, and a really big deal for the future of the country going forward.
So if the administration wanted to cut inflation, all that President Biden would have to do would be to unwind, reverse the restrictions that he put on the energy industry his first week of office, because we
Right.
could ramp up the production of oil pumping and processing. We'd have gasoline, diesel, natural gas, and we would be able to flood the world market with it. We would bring in cash buying our stuff. We would generate jobs, and the effective price of the product at the pump would go down. But more importantly, the slide that we just had popped up, that would affect clothing, fertilizer, food, transportation, pharmaceuticals, anything that has plastic content in it. I mean, it is a massive amount of our lifestyle. The prices would
Correct.
drop if we had more supply available, and the cost of raw material to manage the production of these broad range of products would drop quickly. Inflation would subside, and then with that, interest rates could drop. So a lot of our problem right now has been created by poor political management.
Yep.
I don't know any other way to summarize the problem we're facing economically from the inflation and interest rate stuff.
And
The,
that's
the
pretty
only
much it. And there's a huge potential for growth. We just have to, take the shackles off and let the economy work as it should. And man, we can really make a run.
And in a free country, each individual gets to make the decision that's best for them instead of
Sure.
having the government tell us what's best for us. Because we've watched them mess things up significantly. We can go back to the tech bubble of 2000. That was government intervention in a free market that caused that bubble to occur, and bubbles have to burst. Same thing with intervention, excess manipulation of mortgage market in the 07 and 8 area, and what we're dealing with now with inflation and energy and product restriction availability. I mean, this is government invention instead of letting consumers decide what they want to buy, creating demand responded to by producers. When there's demand, producers jump into the game, and as one company sees another doing well, they will attempt to compete, and competition brings prices down. When you eliminate competition, prices go up because there's no force to make a different decision, and the efficiency is not
It really
important.
is that straightforward. Yeah, it really is if we get the politics out of the way.
I think on inflation, I got one last thing. It wasn't quite on our agenda. That's housing. We're looking at the housing prices, and there are some areas where prices are actually falling because
Yep.
people want to get out of the area. And so that if you don't like living in a state with high taxes or high crime, you leave if you can. That creates inventory for existing housing, and prices drop as inventory rises. Otherwise, house prices aren't dropping rapidly because of the cheap interest rates of a few years ago. And if you're in a 2.5 or 3.5% mortgage, why on earth would you want to go buy a new house in a mortgage with 6.5 or 7? And you would
Yep.
end up buying maybe half the house. And you could relocate someplace perhaps and get a little better demand situation. It might give you maybe 60% of the house. But who wants to swap a house with a 3% mortgage for a 6 or 7? I mean, that's not going to happen. So the housing prices I think, are very sustainable. We're not going to see a big drop in them because the new inventory is going to be new construction. Existing homeowners are only going to sell if there's a high need catalyst, job change, death in the family, illness, grandkids moved away. I mean, there's got to be some real strong motivation to walk away from the house. Otherwise, it's new inventory, and that new inventory has been reduced in price by shrinking the size of the lots, shrinking the footprint of the house, and removing amenities that just a few years ago were an absolute necessity if you were going to sell the property. Home builders are going to be okay even with these higher interest rates. And that's good for the economy. That's going to keep a whole segment of labor force employed. And when houses sell, along with that goes furniture, carpeting, paint, roofing, landscaping. I mean, just think of all the things that are necessary to make your house go together and continue operating. Me being guilty one. I mean, Perry, you know this, but we've just our basement flooded because of failed footing drains prior to Thanksgiving, and we are just now getting all of the repair work done. It has been a nightmare. Well, that's one of the
Yes.
benefits of home ownership. We are keeping the economy going by keeping these contractors busy. Well, if it's new
Way to go,
housing,
Don. Yeah.
they're busy all the time. Anyway, this is a great country. We are we're in better shape than a lot of the news media and the financial press would lead people to believe. And it's my personal opinion that this transition we're going through in the markets is a stage setting for another sustainable long-term bull market. Going to have some problems along the way, but Americans confront problems and solve them. That's what we do. And if you want help with your portfolio, give us a call. Contact information is coming up on the screen. We'll look forward to the next time.